do I really need a root guru? What's the role or relationship of a student to a guru? What's the right relationship to have, and how can we navigate that as a Westerner?
This is the most commonly asked question. In relation to that, in order to answer to that, or in order to maybe navigate that question, it'd be good to be clear about the Buddha's teaching called the Four Reliances. The first ones I often talk about, not to rely on a teacher as a personality, but to rely on his or her teaching messages or advice. The Seeker's Compass, navigating the path with the Buddha's toolkit for critical thinking. We all have this critical thinking, which is good. Westerners bring our, doubt, critical thinking, but then we need to navigate that, right? Then Buddha's teaching comes in, called the Four Reliances. Now we have a dilemma here, the modern practitioner dilemma. The spiritual path today is a vast landscape filled with diverse voices and endless information overload. Right? So even which teaching, countless books, podcasts, and online teaching, often with conflicting advices. Some students come, which one's right or wrong? So there's a context, where they are talking about certain topics and all these things. And also the cult of personality, charismatic teachers with large following, like titles, Dharma, Rinpoche, Jetsuma, all these titles can be compelling. But how do we verify the substance of their teaching, what they are teaching? Sometimes we don't see their teachings, only the presence we see. We are interested in teaching so that we can transform, right? Then the navigating controversy, when authorities, figures are questions. For example, Tibetan Lama, not only Tibetan, Western teachers, their behavior or something like that. How do we separate that timeless wisdom, what they teach, from human fallibilities? We are not infallible. Yeah, we have a flaw as a human being. How do we navigate that? How do we find our true north, in this complex terrain? Do you have that sort of questions? I'm sure I had. Then we have an ancient tool for modern journey. The Buddha provoked the solution, a critical thinking toolkit. Buddha was like a doctor. He prescribed the medicine, right? So this is one of the medicines, critical thinking toolkit, designed to empower students to navigate confusion and authority with confidence. This is known as the Four Reliances. This is very important, so you want to keep this as your toolkit always. Think of them like a compass, actually. Whenever something happens, then you can rely on that. You can go to the Four Reliances and see if that medicine can help you. Think of them as the four cardinal directions. Dharma compass, a timeless instrument for maintaining your course and developing genuine discernment. I never thought about the Four Reliances as a Dharma compass. These four directions. But this is kind of good for us, visual aid. First one is rely on the teaching, not the person. That's related to the specific question, Graham, you had. Do not blindly follow a teacher based on their fame, charisma, or title. Judge the validity of the advice, not the personality of the advisor. So rationale is the authority lies in the Dharma. Dharma is the main refuge. That's the second one, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. All are our refuges, but without Dharma, Buddha, teacher, and the Sangha, only Sangha cannot guide us to the final goal. The teacher might be charismatic, but teach incorrectly, or be socially awkward, yet possesses the profound wisdom. There are two ways, right? Teacher look like sometimes very simple monk, or doesn't look like this really charismatic figure, but simple, humble teacher. But what he or she teaches is very profound and connect, guide you to transform your mind. Then that's the one you want to rely on. The message is a guide, not the messenger, him or herself. That's the first one. Then how we can test the advice, the scandal filter. If a teacher is involved in controversy, focus thoroughly on the instructions they gave for your mind. Do those instructions reduce suffering and increase compassion? That's the bottom line, right? Do those instructions reduce suffering or increase compassion? If so, the instruction remained valid, even if you distance yourself from the person. For example, in the past, in the West, there are very charismatic teachers, and maybe some people, I don't know here, might have followed. And what they taught has benefited you, or even book publications they did. It helped you, then that's. So we need to separate out the person, distance yourself from that person, but those instructions reduce suffering or increase compassion. So that's good, if that's benefit. But you don't need to rely on the person. And the celebrity check. So avoid flocking to the teacher because of a high throng or large social media following. Listen critically. In the Tibetan Buddhism, especially in our tradition, critical thinking is valued. We need to really pay attention. We follow the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, right? His Holiness always said, Lama or Rinpoche doesn't mean they have qualities. We need to check what he teaches. We don't want to jump in as well. Jump and just become followers. And also followers ego trip as well. As the Sangha grows bigger, then, I'm the senior and the most close to the Rinpoche or something. So they start to struggle. Does what they said align with core principles, like compassion and wisdom? Does she teaches compassion and wisdom? Okay, anyway, those kind of questions. So that's the first one. Because not rely on the person, but rely on the teaching. That one, first campus. So now this is good. Many doubts can be answered through this campus. Second one is that rely on the meaning, not the word. That means, of course, Buddha taught many things, right? And the teacher teaches many things in word. But here, the principle, don't get stuck on semantics, metaphors, or imperfect translations. Look at what the words are pointing to. So we should take Buddha's or the teacher's teaching as a pointing instruction. Everything should occur in you as pointing something deeper. Then that's benefiting. Yeah, we get stuck by the semantics or little things, what the teacher teaches. The language is an imperfect vehicle. Like, we cannot express ultimate in language, in a sense, ineffable. But the teachers are trying their best to do that. Then the text in the Tibetan traditions are often translated from Sanskrit to Tibetan, Tibetan to English. Then from teacher's mouth to you. So lots of filters there. So errors and cultural nuances, even translations, English translation of the original language, that's also very problematic. We need to know the context, we need to study, we need to ask questions to teachers what this means. Instead of we understand the certain terminology from our background, culture, for example, Christian background, if we have, then we try to understand from that filter. So that's already causing the problem, obscuring the true meaning. So always have to see what is this teaching pointing to, instead of focusing on specific words and, this one doesn't make sense, or doesn't make sense is good, but then don't bring our own background to interpret certain thing. The Buddha used different metaphors for different audience. Sometimes Buddha's teaching are completely contradicted. Did you notice already? Sometimes Buddha taught everything is a mind. Then the Buddha taught not the mind. Even mind doesn't exist. All these conflicted things because it depends on the audience. He was not like the teachers standing on a soap box and said, okay, I'm going to teach you, I'm going to enlighten you. He never done that. Somebody came, they asked him questions, then he taught. He shared the medicines with that particular person to help him or help her. That might not work for other people. Everything is a context and the audience. Buddha taught all four school thought. For those of you who know, for example, mind-only school, Buddha taught the mind-only school theory at a certain point. Then Buddha also taught, of course, Madhyamika, middle way school, emptiness teaching. All these things. Then obsessing over literal syntax means missing the core intent. This is very important. Rely on the meaning or what the word is pointing to rather than rely on the word itself. Then how we apply, application, find the core intent or intention. So jargon trap. You already trapped with the jargon. When you encounter a complex term like a Dharma dhatu, that's a Sanskrit, right? Or primordial purities, pause, ask, what is this experience? What is the experience this word is describing? It often pointing to something direct and simple, like openness, clarity, or fundamental awareness. Yeah, this is very complex. Dharma dhatu is a complex term. Cannot say even openness, clarity, fundamental awareness. It's about the experience, ineffable experience. But the point here is do not just settle in the word Dharma dhatu, primordial purities, those jogans. This is the translation of the experience or states. Actually, state of everything, mode of thing. If the text mentions making offering of toruma, butter sculptures, understand the essential meaning is generosity and letting go of attachment. You don't need yak butter to practice the heart of the ritual. In our community, we do the tea offering. Purposely, we do ritual. The reason is, in the West, this ritual is disappearing. And something to do with the hand gives a tangible meaning, feeling of this generosity, letting go of attachment. But here, the point of this statement is the meaning is important, why we do what we do. Without knowing that, just ritual for the sake of ritual might be the waste of time. We need to have an intention, core intent. Bodhicitta, actually, bottom line is bodhicitta. Whatever we do in Dakini's Buddhist Path, we want to make sure we have this underlying core intent. That's the second one. Rely on the meaning, not the word. And third one is, this one is a tricky one. Rely on the definitive, not the interpretive meaning. Interpretive meaning means something to be interpreted, so not complete yet. But the definitive is a definitive meaning, or interpretative and definitive. Distinction between partial truth taught to guide beginners. Buddha taught this partial truth, as I was talking about, as a skillful means, and ultimate truth, the final realities, and does not require interpretation. This is the absolute truth. So those two things we need to separate out. Why, we will see why it's very important. The Buddha taught on two levels. You can say two levels, two aspects, or two dimensions, two realities, you can say. First one is interpretive or provisional, sometimes translate provisional, or relative, you can say. Teachings designed for ethical conduct, for example, ethical conduct, and the functional understanding of the world. For example, you exist, we exist. Right? We function, we do good thing, and we do bad thing. good karma, bad karma, all are interpretive, provisional, or relational reality, relational meaning. Then definitive is a teaching about the ultimate, non-dual nature of reality, so-called emptiness teaching. For example, ultimately, there is no inherent separate self. These two teachings we need to separate out. Sometimes Buddha teaches things do not exist. Sometimes Buddha teaches things exist. Then we think, wow, Buddha taught contradiction? No, as students, we have to separate out, he's teaching in this context, and he is also teaching in this context. Then we need to navigate that and benefit from both levels of teaching without bringing this kind of judgment, ordinary feeling, judgmental attitude to this. Then how can we resolve these contradictions? How to apply it? Reconciling the opposite. If one text says the self exists and another says the self is an illusion, recognize the first self exists is an interpretive teaching to prevent unethical behavior, while the second is a definitive teaching to liberate you from ego clinging. Many of you are in the emptiness class. We talked about Madhyamika, cut through the both extreme, complete nihilism, things do not exist at all, or things exist, so-called absolutism. Here, when confused, the teaching on emptiness and the Buddha nature almost always represents the definitive meaning and take precedent over teaching on ritual or minor ethical rules. Here it sounds like rituals are not important, and the more core fundamental teaching is more important. This also can be misinterpreted, especially in the West. We need both. Ritual embraced by the view is so powerful. Especially we are practicing the tantric practice. We don't want to have the one or other kind of attitude. Okay, so we don't need to do all the ritual or the practice, tea offering or whatever, because the view is the most important thing. So I just gonna study the view. This is not what here referring to. I gonna just comment to my personal assistant. This is not what this means. But what means is so often in Tibetan tradition, just doing a ritual and then we're not focusing on the ultimate meaning. This is the third one, rely on definitive, not the interpreted meaning. Of course, this is a big subject. Whole section of the Lamrim Chenmo and also the Lama Tsongkhapa's book, last one, big one, completely focusing on this subject. Tange Lekshin Impo, essence of eloquence. That's a different, we need to talk more about that aspect, which one is this Buddha nature and the emptiness, Madhyamika, and mind-only school and Madhyamika. Those kind of more philosophical argument come from this. But this is Buddha's original teaching. Rely on the definitive, not the interpreted meaning. All these things, two poles, it doesn't mean ignore the interpreted meaning. Like we're talking, both are needed, but then don't lose the sight of the definitive meaning. Even second one was the rely on meaning, not the word. We need to pay attention to the words because that's the doorway, right, to communicate. But don't cling on to the word. Don't attach to the word, but look through the word, then see the core meaning. So that's what I'm saying. Here too, first one was the person, right? Doesn't mean ignore the person's behavior. We can look at the teacher, right? Teacher's behavior or how teacher, what you call walk the talk. We need to see the teacher, but then we need to see through the teacher's behavior, then teaching. That's the important one. All are saying this. So that rely on the definitive, not the interpretive meaning. Then resolving a contradiction, somewhat. Last one, rely on wisdom, not on ordinary consciousness. This wisdom is the translation of yeshe, actually not wisdom. Yeshe means primordial, she means knowing. Sometimes translate the primordial awareness, but often this is the kind of classical translation, the wisdom, not an ordinary consciousness. Intellectual understanding is not enough. Rely on direct non-dual intuition. When we read this kind of sentence, oh, okay, the intellectual understanding is not ultimate, not final. Just rest on the direct non-dual intuition. Something like that. Lots of people misunderstood that way, historically speaking as well. Then abandon the intellectual understanding. But I think especially in the West, we need to understand intellectually first, or the study first, not just rest in the direct non-dual intuition, because that's diluted. Already our mind is diluted. We don't want to rest in dirty water, non-dually. That's just a waste of time. We need to actively cut through our confusions, through understanding, whatever method we can use. We have intelligence. Especially in the West, we have very sharp faculties, thinking mind. So that's important. We want to make use of it. But here what's saying is that's not enough. Rely on the direct non-dual intuition. So ordinary consciousness, the dualistic conceptual mind, the voice in your head that analyzes, categorizes, and judge subject and object. This is important. Ordinary consciousness has two things, like just chit-chat. Most of us may be occupied like a chit-chat or kind of idle talk or, all these useless things in consciousness. Versus this more disciplined, analytical, disciplined thinking mind. That's the important one. We need to cultivate that we need to make use of that. Especially in our tradition, definitely we need to do that. We need to analyze. We need to ask questions. We need to see through with this intellectual, rational mind. Here, versus wisdom. I said with prajna, the direct, non-conceptual, and immediate. Actually, this is wrong. Prajna is a share up. Jnana is okay. Yes, translation, yes. The direct, non-conceptual, and the immediate experience of reality. You cannot think your way to enlightenment. You must eventually experience it. That's important. Experiential. Everything has to come down to our own experience, right? Not just thinking mind. But the thinking mind, I said disciplined, particular way of thinking, it cut through this ordinary consciousness, then dawning of jnana, dawning of this direct experience. Then direct experience leads to the realization. So that's kind of steps we take, which means we should not ignore the first step. Without the first step, difficult, unless we have a very much like karmic momentum from previous lives. We did a lot of study, lot of meditation, lot of thinking, but for us, our mind is already completely confused. We need to clarify, cutting through these things through our skillful means of understanding, study, understanding, contemplation, analyzing, debating, discussing, like this kind of opportunity we have, discussing, clarifying, then meditating, then experiencing, then realizing, then Buddha. So those steps are important. Then moving from thinking to experience, how to apply it. Overthinker breaker. If you find yourself reading 50 books and debating philosophy online, but never actually meditating, you are relying solely on ordinary consciousness. Stop analyzing, sit and simply be with your breath. Yeah, this is talking about two extremes though. One is to just overthinking. Maybe you might came across this kind of group debating about Buddhist teaching or whatever. or even within yourself, this tendency to go into one extreme. Another extreme is just simply sitting with your breath. Doesn't lead you to anywhere. Maybe calm your mind a little bit and mindfulness. And that's great, especially in the modern time, very busy. Our mind is so much thing going on. It's necessary to sit with your breath and awareness. We do too in our community, but that's not enough. Here it's talking about overthinking. In your practice, you may have moments where your deep intuition feels a sense of peace or lightness. This is a tantric practice, right? For example, when we are practicing the same old deity practice or something like that, Vajra Yogini or whatever deity you practice, sometimes we have this internal kind of experience, deep feeling that here expressing the sense of peace or bliss or lightness. That's beyond the thinking, even very hard to explain in word. Blessing, sense of blessing, something I feel in my body, somatic sensation. Feel the entire body is filled with this sense of, I don't know how to describe, but inspiration, like us, inspiring forces. So that's sort of thing talking about. That's beyond the intellect. In advanced practice, you learn to trust that non-conceptual wisdom over the chattering logical mind. Advanced practice, the tantric practice, we started to trust in that internal wisdom, dawning of wisdom experience. Here, the last one, right? We are talking about don't rely on the ordinary consciousness, but rely on the wisdom. Complete Dharma compass. Oh, now summary, finishing up. So how everything, Four Reliances, that's called Buddha's teaching. I want you to memorize it. We started out north, teaching versus person. Shift focus from messenger to messages. Of course, these are very simplified chart, right? So there are lots of pitfall there. So I was trying to figure out this. It doesn't mean that rely on the messengers. We have to rely on the messengers, but the focus, primary focus, only focusing on the messengers, but not the message, does not give you to the place where you want to go. So that's what this means. Saying ignore charisma, test the advice. You always need to test what he or she teaches, like testing the gold, that the metaphor, Indian metaphor, Buddhist metaphor used. When you want to buy the gold, you really need to test the gold, whether this is the real, true gold or not. That's your job. We have a lot to do. It's all up to us in a sense. There's no the God or the Buddha out there to give us enlightenment. So that's what the Buddha said, right? I cannot give you the enlightenment. I cannot give you the final goal. But so you have to earn yourself. But I can show you how to go there. I can point the finger to the path and the goal. That's the teacher's role. One role here. Then, this way, syntax, meaning versus word. Shift focus from syntax, words, to intent, meaning behind it. Don't argue translation. Find the core point. Therefore, it's very important to rely on the teaching and the teacher, right? Without that, it's very difficult because the internet information gives you all different kind of information. Even look at this one itself gives us a wrong impression and confusions. Without, I don't know, I clarified this or not, but without fine prints. So always need a context, which is taught by the teacher or somebody else. Then context, ultimate truth, definitive and interpretive. Interpretive meaning means relative teachings, and the definitive teaching like emptiness, Interpretative means even like a mind-only school kind of teachings. If teachings contradict, emptiness usually wins. Yeah, I don't know this expression, but emptiness is ultimate for sure. Yeah, emptiness, this is a loaded word. Not nothingness, as you all know. Here, wisdom, consciousness. Shift focus from thinking mind to experiencing it. But the irony is, without the correct thinking, cannot experience it. See, all these need to be taught in a context and explained. Move from reading books? No. I mean, don't move from reading books. You need to read the books, but certain books to meditation practice. Without learning, studying, teaching, just meditation doesn't lead us to anywhere except calming mind and shamatha, one-pointed, or maybe peace of your mind. But that's not the ultimate. Yeah, we want to transform ourselves. We want to enlighten so that we can bring ultimate happiness to ourselves, to others. Don't you think that's what we want? Just a simple meditation practice doesn't lead us there, if that doesn't have a content. Okay, so that's that. The framework for spiritual self-reliance for the contemporary Western practitioners. The Four Reliances are not just a philosophy or ideas or teaching. They are declaration of spiritual independence. Yeah, actually, this is the savior. Don't you think, for the Westerners? We want the independent. We like independence, spiritual independence. We don't want to be trapped by some authority or something, They provide a valid traditional framework to question authority with integrities, engage with teachers and text critically without being disrespectful, clarify doubts, resolve contradictions, and confusions using a time-tested method. This kind of opportunity, like here, Dakini Clinic, is a very important. We need to have this kind of opportunity, open question and answer discussion opportunity, especially in the Western Buddhist communities. Then build an authentic practice, move beyond the dogma, and develop a mature, self-sufficient, and a wise relationship with the Dharma. That's the thing, right? We want to create just the self-sufficient and a wise relationship with the Dharma. By doing it, by understanding what you're doing, then they're actually doing it. That's why we encourage a student who committed to Dakini's Whisper, just jump in to the Sangha practice, then start to understand a little bit, then become a self-sufficient, bring that practice to our own daily practice, started to create a relationship with the Dharma, not to just rely on something external. You know what I mean? That feels easier, like if we have some authentic figures and can do whatever he or she said to me, what can I do? Then they do this and do that. But then that doesn't lead us to maybe suggestion. And then we start to develop a mature, self-sufficient and wise relationship with the Dharma. So that's an important thing. This is the last. Your campus is calibrated, the pathways. The Four Reliances are not a destination. Yeah, again, this is the kind of process, right? But you are constant guide. Use this compass in every book you read, every teaching you hear, and every moment of your practice. It is your tool for navigating the path with clarity, confidence, and wisdom.